I run this little cafe in a tiny corner of Columbus, Ohio. It's nothing fancy, just some coffee, sandwiches, and pie. The kind of place where regulars come to escape their lives for a bit. My regulars are like my family, really. Well, they were. Lately, business hasn't been great. I think the bigger chains have been squeezing me out, and people just don't want homemade when they can get trendy instead. It got bad enough that last month I had to sell my car to pay rent for the cafe. I've been biking everywhere, which is fine, but, not ideal when it's raining or freezing. The thing is, I love this place. I've been running it for almost 3 years now. My mom used to say it was my way of nurturing the world, but honestly, I just like feeding people. Seeing someone smile after a meal makes the long hours worth it. But lately, I'm not smiling much. I've been stressed out about money, I'm behind on bills, and honestly, I'm scared I'm going to lose the one thing I care about. Then a few days ago, something weird happened. Something I can't quite explain. And now my life is completely upside down. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet stretch where I'd normally wipe down the counters for the third time or rearrange the pastries in the display case to make it look like someone had bought something. That's when he walked in. He looked rough. Not hipster who paid for distressed jeans rough, but slept in a doorway last night rough. His clothes were dirty, his hair was tangled, and his face looked weathered, like he'd been outside for years. The guy couldn't have been much older than me, maybe mid-30s, but his eyes? They looked ancient. "Hi," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like it hadn't been used in days. "Do you have any water?" I stared at him for a second, my brain slow to catch up. Then I nodded and grabbed a glass. As I handed it to him, I noticed his hands were shaking. "Thanks," he muttered, gulping it down like it was the first drink he'd had in ages. I hesitated. He looked starving. And I mean starving. My first thought was that he was homeless, but the way he carried himself felt different. Like he wasn't used to asking for help. "Are you hungry?" I blurted out before I could overthink it. He looked up, startled. His expression was hard to read. Some mix of pride, desperation, and disbelief. I don't have any money." "It's fine," I said, waving it off. "You don't need to pay. I'll grab you something." Before he could argue, I ducked into the kitchen. I threw together a grilled cheese and a cup of tomato soup, the quickest thing I could make that was warm and filling. When I brought it out, he looked at the plate like it was $1,000,000. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I shrugged. "You look like you need it. Everyone deserves to eat." He didn't say anything after that, just started eating. But the way he ate, carefully, methodically, like he didn't want to waste a single crumb. It was heartbreaking to watch. And that's when things started getting strange. I busied myself behind the counter, pretending not to watch him, but honestly, I couldn't help it. There was something about him, something off. When he finished, he pushed the plate away and sat there for a moment, staring at the table. I expected him to leave, maybe say thanks and shuffle out. Instead, he looked up and said, "Do you believe in karma?" I froze. It wasn't the kind of question you expect after giving someone a grilled cheese. I guess. Why? He leaned back in the chair, his eyes fixed on mine. "Because what you just did, that changes everything. For both of us." My stomach tightened. "Okay," I said slowly. "Are you all right? Do you need anything else?" He shook his head.
No.
"You've done enough. More than you realize." Then he stood up, and for a second, I thought he was going to leave without another word. But before he turned to go, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward me. "This is for you," he said. I blinked, confused. It was a small, folded piece of paper. "What is it?" "Everything you'll need," he said cryptically. And then he walked out. I stood there for a minute, staring at the door after he left. Everything about the interaction was weird, but that last part? Straight up bizarre. Finally, I grabbed the paper and unfolded it. Inside was a single line written in shaky handwriting. "Check under table 4 at midnight." My heart thudded in my chest. Table 4 was the booth in the back corner, the one he'd been sitting near. What the hell was this? A prank? Some kind of setup? I almost threw it away. Almost. But something in me, Curiosity, stupidity, I don't know, told me to wait and see.
So I did.
I locked up the cafe at my usual time but stuck around, pacing the floor and watching the clock. Midnight felt like a million years away. When the clock finally struck midnight, my nerves were shot. I wasn't sure what I expected to find under table for a note, maybe? A joke? Nothing at all. I grabbed a flashlight from the back and made my way over to the booth. The cafe was eerily quiet, and the dim light from the street lamps outside only made it feel creepier. I crouched down and shined the flashlight under the table. For a moment, I didn't see anything, just a bunch of dust and a stray napkin. Then I spotted it, something taped to the underside of the table. It was a small, metal box. My hands were shaking as I peeled it off. It was heavier than I expected, about the size of a paperback book, and locked with a tiny padlock. I brought it back to the counter and stared at it like it might explode. What was this? Why would a random guy leave something like this in my cafe? And why me? I searched the box for clues. There were no markings, no labels, nothing to tell me what it was or why it was here. Just that stupid little lock. That's when I noticed something else on the table. In my hurry, I'd missed it earlier. Another note, folded neatly and tucked under the salt shaker. It read, "The key is in the kitchen. You'll know where." My heart raced. This was turning into some kind of scavenger hunt, and I wasn't sure if I was excited, terrified, or just losing it. But against my better judgment, I followed the clue. I tore through the kitchen, opening drawers, cabinets, anything that might hold a key. Then I saw it, a key taped to the back of the spice rack. I grabbed it and ran back to the box. My hands fumbled with the lock, but it clicked open after a few tries. Inside was cash. I stared, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Stacks of bills, neatly bundled, filling the little box to the brim. This wasn't a few bucks. This was thousands. I don't even know how long I stared at that box. Minutes? Hours? Time kind of stopped when I realized what I was holding. My first thought was that it couldn't be real. Nobody just leaves this kind of money lying around, especially not in a random diner for some broke girl they don't know. My second thought? This has to be stolen. I mean, how else do you explain it? This wasn't someone's paycheck or some random inheritance. This was sketchy. And suddenly, my excitement turned into full-blown panic. What if the guy came back and wanted it? What if someone else was looking for it? What if I got dragged into something I couldn't handle? I locked the door to the cafe, double-checked it, even, then sat down and counted the money. It wasn't just thousands. It was $10,000.
10,000
$1,000. Do you know what that kind of money could do for me? I could pay off the back rent on the cafe, replace my broken oven, even put a little aside for emergencies. It was life-changing money. But then there was the other side of it. I kept replaying the guy's face in my head, the way he'd said, "You've done enough. More than you realize." Was this his way of paying me back for the sandwich? Because, let's be real, no grilled cheese is worth 10 grand. And what if he was testing me? Like, some kind of moral experiment to see if I'd keep the money or turn it in. I didn't know what to do. My gut told me I shouldn't keep it, but my bank account was screaming, "Alice, this is your miracle. Don't be stupid." I decided to sleep on it. Or at least try to. Spoiler. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. My brain wouldn't shut up. By the time the sun came up, I was more confused than ever. That's when I made my first decision. I needed to know more about the man who'd left it behind. The next morning, I was a mess. I opened the cafe like usual, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time a customer walked in, my heart skipped a beat, thinking it might be him. It wasn't. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled up the cafe's security footage on my laptop, hoping I could find something useful. The cameras weren't the best, cheap ones I'd installed myself, but they were clear enough to give me a good look at him. I watched the clip of him walking in, over and over. His movements, his face, the way he glanced around like he was checking for someone. There wasn't much to go on. No wallet, no phone, no car. Just him and that beat-up jacket. I had no idea where to start, so I did the only thing I could think of. I asked around. During the slow hours, I biked around the neighborhood, showing the grainy screenshot I'd printed from the security footage. I asked the homeless folks who hung out near the park, the clerk at the gas station, even the guy at the corner liquor store, who always smelled like tequila. Nobody recognized him. I was starting to think I'd hit a dead end when one of the regulars at the cafe, Mrs. Caldwell, came in. She's this sweet old lady who knows everyone in the neighborhood. If anyone could help, it was her. I showed her the picture and asked if he looked familiar. She squinted at it for a long moment before nodding. I think I've seen him around the old train station, she said. A lot of drifters hang out there. Might be worth checking. The train station was a few miles away, and honestly, it wasn't the safest part of town. But I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. So after I closed up for the day, I locked the cash box in my apartment, grabbed a jacket, and biked over to the station. The place was as sketchy as I'd imagined. Broken windows, graffiti everywhere, and the faint smell of something burning. A few people were milling around, but none of them looked like him. I was about to give up when I spotted someone sitting on a bench near the edge of the platform. His back was to me, but the jacket was unmistakable. It was him. I walked up slowly, my heart pounding. "Hey," I said. He turned around, and for a second I wasn't sure it was the same guy. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. "You came," he said, his voice soft and tired. "I have questions," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About the money. What's going on?"
Who are you?
He looked at me for a long time, like he was trying to decide something. Finally, he said, "Sit down. I'll tell you what I can." And that's when things got even stranger. I sat down on the bench, keeping a cautious distance. The guy didn't seem dangerous, but there was something heavy in the air, like whatever he was about to say would change everything. "You're probably wondering why I left the money," he started, his voice low. "Yeah," I said, crossing my arms. "That's putting it lightly." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "My name's Daniel. I wasn't always like this. I used to have a good life, a wife, a nice house, a job that paid well enough. Then everything fell apart. Bad decisions, bad people. I lost everything." He paused, staring at the cracked pavement in front of us. "The money? It's not mine." "Not really. I was supposed to deliver it to someone, but I couldn't do it. The people who gave it to me, they're not good people. And now they're after me." My stomach dropped. "Are you telling me this is blood money?" "Not exactly," he said. "But it's dirty, no doubt about that. When you gave me that meal, I don't know why, but it reminded me that there's still good in the world. That maybe I didn't have to go through with what I was doing." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "So, you just left it? For me?" "I figured you'd know what to do with it," he said. "You seem like someone who cares about others, someone who could put it to better use than the people I was working for." I didn't know whether to feel flattered or furious. "You could have just, I don't know, turned it into the cops or something?" He shook his head. "You don't understand. These people? They own the cops. If I went to them, I'd be dead by morning. And now, they probably think I've already handed it off." I felt like I was going to throw up. "So, you're telling me I'm holding on to money that some dangerous criminals are looking for?" Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "I didn't think they'd come looking for you. I figured you'd use it, move on, and that would be the end of it." "Move on," I said, my voice rising. What the hell am I supposed to do with 10 grand of dirty money? He didn't answer right away. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were full of regret. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I didn't know where else to turn." For a moment, we just sat there in silence. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. I was terrified, angry, and weirdly a little sad for him. Finally, I asked, "What do I do now? What happens next?" He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "That's up to you. But if I were you, I'd get rid of it."
Fast.
The weight of his words hit me like a truck. I didn't know if I could trust him, but one thing was clear, my life wasn't going to go back to normal anytime soon. I biked home that night with the box strapped to my back like a ticking time bomb. Every sound, every shadow on the street made me jump. Daniel's warning about getting rid of the money played on a loop in my head, but how you just get rid of $10,000? Back in my apartment, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and put the box on the kitchen table. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my mind spinning in 100 different directions. The money could save my cafe. It could turn everything around. But it wasn't mine. And now that I knew where it came from, it felt like it was burning a hole through my soul. I tried to think of ways to handle it. I could take it to the cops. But what if Daniel was right? What if they were in on it? I could donate it, but what if someone tracked it back to me? And then there was the crazy idea that I could just keep it, fix my life, and hope for the best. I hated myself for even considering it, but the thought was there. By the time the sun started creeping through the windows, I still didn't have an answer. I was exhausted and anxious, and the only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't sit around doing nothing.
So I made a plan.
First, I'd hide the money somewhere safe. Somewhere no one could connect to me. Then, I'd figure out a way to deal with it without putting myself or anyone else in danger. I wrapped the cash in an old t-shirt, shoved it into a backpack, and biked to the storage unit I used for extra supplies from the cafe. It wasn't much, just a dingy little space with a padlock, but it was out of sight and, more importantly, out of my apartment. As I locked the unit, a wave of relief washed over me. The money was out of my hands, at least for now. But as I pedaled back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And that's when I saw the black car. It was parked across the street from my apartment, sleek and nondescript. A car you wouldn't think twice about, unless you were paranoid as hell, like I was at that moment. I slowed my bike as I approached, pretending to fumble with my bag, but my heart was hammering. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside. I kept biking past, my brain racing. Was it them? Were they watching me? Or was I just imagining things? I made it to the corner and glanced back. The car hadn't moved, but now I was sure it wasn't there earlier. Instead of going straight home, I took a detour, circling the block a few times to see if anyone was following me. No sign of the car. When I finally got back to my building, the street was quiet. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Inside, I double-checked the locks and sat by the window, peeking through the curtains like some paranoid weirdo. Hours passed. Nothing happened. But just as I was starting to think I'd imagined it, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity and fear got the better of me. "Hello," I said, my voice shaky. There was a long pause on the other end, and then a deep voice said, "Alice." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "You have something that doesn't belong to you," the voice said, calm but firm. My heart felt like it was going to explode. "I don't know what you're talking about." The voice chuckled softly, and it was somehow more terrifying than if they'd yelled. "Don't play dumb. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We're giving you one chance to return it. You have 24 hours. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling. My mind was racing with questions. How did they know my name? How did they find me? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? I wanted to scream, cry, and throw the phone across the room all at once. Instead, I grabbed a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and tried to calm myself enough to think straight. I had two choices: hand over the money and hope they'd leave me alone, or come up with a plan to get out of this mess. Neither option felt safe, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't about to go down without a fight. I sat there, staring at my phone, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Returning the money sounded simple enough, except I didn't trust these people. There was no guarantee they'd leave me alone afterward. And then there was Daniel. I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left me with more than just the cash. He'd left me with his problem. I couldn't handle this alone. I pulled up my contacts list and hovered over a name: Ethan. He was my best friend, practically my brother, and the only person I trusted enough to tell the truth. He worked in IT, which somehow made him feel more capable of dealing with shady stuff like this. I hit call. "Hey, Alice, what's up?" he answered, his voice casual. "Ethan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need your help." And before you ask, yes, it's serious.
He paused.
Okay, you're scaring me. What happened? Can you come over? It's complicated. I'll explain everything when you get here. He didn't ask any more questions, which is why I loved him. On my way. 30 minutes later, Ethan was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, his expression growing more incredulous as I told him the whole story. Daniel, the money, the call, the black car. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Damn, Alice. When you decide to get involved in something sketchy, you really go all out. Not helpful, Ethan, I snapped. What do I do? These people know my name. They know where I live. He rubbed his temples. All right, let's think this through. First, do you have the money here? No, I said. It's in my storage unit.
Good. Keep it there for now.
No way should you have it in the apartment. He paused, his brow furrowing. We need to figure out who these people are. If they're serious, we can't just hand over the money and hope they leave you alone. I nodded, feeling a tiny flicker of relief. Ethan always knew how to make things feel less impossible. I can dig around, he said. If we can figure out who they are, we'll have a better idea of what we're dealing with. But Alice... His voice trailed off, and for the first time, he looked genuinely worried.
What? I asked.
This is dangerous. Like, real dangerous. If these people are who I think they are, we need to be careful. They don't just make threats, they follow through. I swallowed hard. So, what do? We start by getting some answers, he said. And then we figure out how to make them go away for good. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the first shred of hope I'd felt all day. What I didn't know was how much worse things were about to get. The next morning, I opened the cafe like I always did, trying to act normal despite the whirlwind of fear and paranoia swirling inside me. Ethan had stayed up half the night researching, but so far, he hadn't found much. By mid-morning, the usual flow of customers started trickling in. I was halfway through making a latte when I noticed something strange. A black envelope sitting on the counter by the register. It hadn't been there a minute ago. I looked around the cafe, my pulse quickening. None of the customers seemed out of place. Just the usual faces. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. Last warning. Deliver the money tonight. Instructions at 8 p.m. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a threat, it was a direct message delivered right under my nose. These people weren't just watching me. They could get to me whenever they wanted. I shoved the note into my pocket and tried to focus on finishing the latte. But my hands were trembling so badly, I spilled milk all over the counter. You okay, Alice? One of the regulars asked, frowning. Yeah, I said quickly, forcing a smile. Just a little tired. As soon as the cafe cleared out, I locked the door and called Ethan. They left a note, I said, pacing behind the counter. What did it say? I read it to him, my voice shaking. There was a long pause on the other end. They're tightening the noose, he said finally. This is their way of making sure you're scared enough to comply. You've got two options. Hand over the money or find a way to turn the tables. And how do I do that? I asked, my frustration bubbling over. These people have resources, connections. They know everything about me. What am I supposed to do? Just outsmart a criminal organization? Not alone, Ethan said. We need more leverage. Something we can use against them. Like what? Daniel, he said. He knows more than he's telling you. We need to talk to him again. I groaned, running a hand through my hair. The last thing I wanted was to get dragged deeper into this mess. But Ethan was right. If we were going to survive this, we needed answers, and fast.
Fine, I said.
But if he disappears again, we're screwed. Ethan's voice was firm. Then we don't let him disappear. Meet me at the train station at 6. We'll find him together. I hung up, my nerves fraying at the edges. The clock was ticking, and I had no idea if I'd live to see the next day. I met Ethan at the train station just before sunset. He was waiting near the platform, his face a mix of determination and worry. You ready? He asked as I rolled up on my bike. Not even a little, I admitted. hopping off and locking it to a post. We walked through the station together, scanning every shadow and figure. The place was even sketchier than the last time I'd been here, with clusters of people huddled in corners and the occasional sound of glass breaking in the distance. Finally, we spotted him. Daniel was slumped on a bench, looking even worse than before. His jacket hung off his thin frame, and his face was pale and hollow. "Daniel," I called, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked up, startled. When he saw me, his expression hardened. "You shouldn't be here," he said, glancing around nervously. "Yeah, well, I didn't have much of a choice," I shot back. "You left me with a pile of cash and a target on my back. Now I need answers." Ethan stepped forward, crossing his arms. "Start talking, Daniel.
Who are these people?
And why do they think Alice has their money?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "You don't get it. These aren't just criminals, they're powerful. They run everything, drugs, weapons, even human trafficking. The money you have, it was supposed to pay off a debt. A big one. And now they think you're holding out on them. Why didn't you just pay them yourself?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "Because paying them doesn't make you safe," he said, his voice rising. "It makes you a target. They keep you on a leash, bleed you dry until there's nothing left. I thought if I gave it to someone else, someone good, they wouldn't bother to follow the trail." "Well, that plan backfired," Ethan muttered. I glared at Daniel. "So what do we do now?" "They gave me until tonight to deliver the money. If I don't, they're coming after me." Daniel hesitated, then said, "There's one way out, but it's risky." "Riskier than this?" Ethan asked, gesturing around us. Daniel nodded grimly. "We need to find their weak spot. Every organization has one. If we can expose it, we can make them back off." "And how exactly do we do that?" I asked. Daniel looked at me, his eyes tired but resolute. "There's a warehouse on the edge of town. That's where they keep their records, the real ones. If we can get inside and find something incriminating, we can use it as leverage." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "You're talking about breaking into a criminal organization's headquarters?" "It's the only way," Daniel said. "They won't stop unless you give them a reason to." I felt like I was going to faint. This wasn't what I'd signed up for. I was just a girl who ran a cafe, not some action movie hero. But when I looked at Ethan and Daniel, I realized I didn't have a choice. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking. "Let's do it." As we walked back toward the street, the weight of what I'd just agreed to settled over me like a storm cloud. Tonight, I wasn't just fighting for my cafe or my freedom, I was fighting for my life. The warehouse was everything I feared it would be, dark, imposing, and eerily quiet. It sat on the edge of an industrial district, surrounded by chain-link fences and empty parking lots. The only sign of life was the faint glow of a single light above the entrance. Ethan, Daniel, and I crouched behind an abandoned shipping container, going over the plan one last time. "Okay," Ethan whispered. "We sneak in, find the records, and get out. No heroics, no messing around."
Got it.
"Got it," I said, even though my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Daniel nodded, but didn't say anything. I could tell he was just as scared as I was. We slipped through a gap in the fence and made our way toward the building. Ethan had managed to hack into their security system earlier in the day, disabling most of the cameras, but there was no guarantee we wouldn't run into guards. When we reached the door, Ethan pulled out a small lock-picking kit and got to work. It took less than a minute for the lock to click open. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates, shelves, and filing cabinets. The air smelled like metal and dust, and every creak of the floorboards made me jump. "Over there," Daniel whispered, pointing to a small office in the corner. "That's where they keep the records." We moved as quickly and quietly as we could. Ethan opened the office door, and we slipped inside. The room was cramped, with filing cabinets lining the walls and a desk covered in papers. "Start looking," Ethan said, already digging through one of the drawers. I opened another drawer, my hands shaking. Most of the files were meaningless to me. Lists of transactions, shipping manifests, names I didn't recognize. Then I found it, a ledger with names, dates, and payments that didn't look legal. This has to be it, I whispered, holding up the book. Ethan glanced at it and nodded. Yeah, that'll do. Let's. The sound of heavy footsteps cut him off. Shit, Daniel hissed. They're here. We froze, listening as the footsteps grew louder. A voice called out, sharp and commanding. I know you're in here. Come out, and maybe we won't kill you. Ethan grabbed the ledger and stuffed it into his backpack. We need to go.
Now.
We slipped out of the office and ducked behind a row of crates. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the beam of a flashlight sweeping through the warehouse. Over there, someone shouted. We bolted. My legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline kept me moving. We dodged through the maze of shelves, the sound of pursuit right behind us. By some miracle, we made it back to the door. Ethan yanked it open, and we sprinted outside, heading for the fence. Shots rang out, the sound tearing through the night. I didn't look back, too terrified to see how close they were. We reached the gap in the fence and scrambled through it. A car screeched to a halt nearby. Ethan's friend, a guy named Jake, was waiting to drive us away. Get in, he yelled, throwing the passenger door open. We piled into the car, and Jake floored it. The warehouse disappeared behind us, but my heart didn't stop racing until we were miles away. The aftermath. The ledger turned out to be more powerful than we'd imagined. It detailed not just illegal activities but connections to corrupt officials, including some high-profile names. Ethan handed it off anonymously to a journalist he trusted, and within days, the story was everywhere. The criminal organization was exposed, their leaders arrested, and their grip on the city shattered. As for me, I kept the money, at least some of it. Daniel insisted I take it, saying it was the least I deserved after everything I'd been through. I used it to save the cafe, finally replacing the broken equipment and catching up on bills. Daniel disappeared after that night. I'd like to think he found a way to start over, but I'll probably never know for sure. Sometimes I still look over my shoulder, half expecting someone to come after me. But for now, life is quiet again. What I learned. If there's one thing this whole mess taught me, it's that kindness is complicated. Helping someone doesn't always come without consequences, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
So yeah.
Be kind.
Be brave.
But maybe think twice before giving free meals to mysterious strangers. You never know where it might lead.